Okay, well, it is now 7:06. We'll call this meeting back on to order. Next up on the agenda is a phone call with Live Oak Finance, or John Blackford. He has a presentation for us.
Yes, you'll have to forgive me. I'm traveling this evening. I'm in an airport lounge, so please forgive any background noise or any airport announcements.
All right, we're ready. We just started, so you can take off when you're ready. About how long do you think, John? How long do you think this is
for the discussion?
For this presentation?
I'm going to go through it kind of quickly in order to be respectful of time, yours and mine. So if you have questions, please do feel free to kind of interject and ask, and I'm going to kind of move through it quickly and do an overview of kind of what we're looking at here, and then we'll talk a little bit of timing at the end, maybe 30 minutes, maybe a little bit less, so depending on questions. So I'm going to go ahead and move through it. Are you guys able to see a screen? Should I go ahead and share my screen with you to see the prepresentation?
Yeah, I think you should do that, but I did do the that printout that you sent me. Each board member has that.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. It should be about the same printout.
Okay.
And you'll be able to. Okay. Okay, so I'll get right into it. Guys, last time we talked about the potential of refunding the bond that you currently have outstanding. We know that the call date is not until 8/15 of 2022. There was a couple of different ways that we talked about being able to refund that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Oh wow, that moves quick. And then we will look at some new money capacity and talk a little bit about what that might look like for the district too. So on this summary page, you can see here scenario 1, scenario 2. Scenario 1 was the most immediate scenario that was presented, called a taxable advance refunding. It would mean switching from a tax-exempt interest rate to a taxable interest rate, and it would allow you to refund your bond ahead of the 8/15/2022 call date. Some people feel the need to move quickly on these things, or maybe in a situation where they need to move quickly, and therefore they're willing to kind of bridge that gap. I think what we discussed here is there is some negative drawback to doing an advance refunding in general, and now there's even more drawback to switching to a taxable rate. You can see there in scenario 1 just kind of the summary of the statistics there. You have an average cash flow savings, meaning every year, of about $20,000 for about $240,000 in savings. When you consider the present value of that, which takes out some inflation component there, you know, your present value savings is about $209. So you actually save about $240,000 in cash with a present value of about $209 back to today. That equates to about 3.5% savings right on a taxable advance refund. I think last time we spoke, conventional wisdom told us that we still had plenty of room from an interest rate standpoint to wait to get closer to our call date. That's kind of the summary you see there. Scenario 2 would be a tax-exempt current refunding, meaning we maintain our tax-exempt status, our tax-exempt rate, and we wait to fund the refunding within 90 days of the call date, which is 8/15/22. I think if you kind of look at the statistics there, you can see average annual savings of about $37,000 a year as opposed to 20, for a total cash flow savings of somewhere in the neighborhood of $550,000 as opposed to $240,000. So what we're looking at is, and what that lends to, you can see the bullet point just below, about 8.21% instead of 3.5%. We're still in a great position to be able to wait to refund. You can see that kind of that last arrow under scenario 2 says the district can endure 70 basis points or 0.71% interest rate of market volatility and still be better off by waiting to get closer to your call date. Last time we spoke, I think that number was 40 basis points, and now it's 70. So what's happened is the taxable market has increased, the tax-exempt market has remained flat, creating an even bigger spread now than what we looked at before. So you can see that just that kind of market movement has created a benefit for us there for waiting. So again, I think conventional wisdom tells us, let's go ahead and continue to wait. And what would happen is we would want to try and close your refunding somewhere just after May 15th, which would put us within the 90-day window of your call date. So, we would probably start on documentation somewhere in February or March. We would have a pricing somewhere in April, and we would have a closing date somewhere after May 15th. So, in thinking about an August call date, we may seem a long way away. It's not that far away. It's definitely not that far away, but I do think there is still very much inherent advantage, nearly $250,000 of additional savings that can be experienced by the city. The next couple of slides kind of just show exactly what we just saw, and so I will not spend a ton of time talking about those slides. You can see the first refunding slide there is the taxable advance. It's showing you your prior debt service, what your new debt service would be, and then you can see in the column to the far right down at the bottom, that represents the roughly $240,000 in total savings that you would experience through a taxable advance refunding. And we talked about it, 3.46%, about $240,000 in cash flow savings. The next slide is showing the tax exempt. And again, we're saying that this one is much more beneficial. You can see your prior debt service, what your new debt service would be, and in that column to the far right be roughly $556,000 worth of savings that you would experience if you wait to be within that 90-day window and experience tax exempt rates and a current refunding. So, that's equates to that kind of just over 8% savings, and I think that's the mark to strive for. And again, the last kind of dash mark there in the summary shows that we still have 70 basis points worth of spread to eat up before we even get close to breaking even. So I think we're still great. We're still in the same position we were last time we talked as far as the refunding, is we're just going to wait till we get close to your call date and make it a current refunding and pick up, roughly another $250,000 or more in savings. So, are there any questions on the refunding itself, or kind of where we stand on that?
John, about the only thing that I see from some of the interest rate stuff that I've read, over the last 60 days or so, we've seen short-term rates continue to push higher while long-term has stayed fairly consistent. Do you see the long-terms trying to catch up and change anything in our plan here in the future?
I'm having a hard time hearing you. You're kind of breaking up there.
Or should I send an email? I'll send a note.
He'll send you an email.
Gotcha. That would be a wonderful idea. I'll be happy to answer any questions that arise as a result of the presentation here, and can get back to you by email just as easily too. So if we move down to the next slide, what we're showing is a comparison of your historical tax rate. This slide has number 4 at the bottom. Pretty straightforward, just a comparison of your historical tax rate. And I think what we're trying to show here is that as recently as 2018, you were at a higher overall tax rate than you're currently at. A lot of that is due to tax rate compression by the state on your M&O side. So basically, through no fault of your own, you're currently at a lower tax rate than what you were in 2018. The thought would be that in looking at some new money capacity on the bond side, you might reinstitute some of those pennies that you were compressed on the M&O side and put them on your INS side for use in future projects. So that's kind of the basis of our new money discussion, is if we simply went back and tried to regain some of our compression pennies, how would that benefit us from a bond standpoint? And so we'll look at that. So what that equates to, I think we head down to the next slide there. And what we're looking at is the timing. So let's just say, for argument's sake, the next bond election cycle that you could go for is May of this next year. If you were to go for a bond election in May, you could potentially coordinate that bond sale with your refunding and have one sale for the both of them. And if we were to coordinate those two together, and we were to add a few compression pennies back, which would equate to about 4.9 cents, and that's the delta between what your 2018 overall tax rate was and what your 2021 overall tax rate is. You'd add back about 4.9 or 5 pennies for use on the bond side for a total INS rate of about 15.9 pennies. That would afford you a maximum of about $16.5 million. $16.5 million. And that's a reasonable amount. So if you were thinking about making some improvements or to the high school area or anything else, obviously 16.5 will go pretty far. I think the complete renovation of the junior high was just north of 20 or 22 million. I think things at that time were much less expensive, cost of materials, everything. So I wouldn't expect that 16.5 is going to do something like what you did at the junior high. But I think it does go quite a ways as far as renovation and upkeep and what needs might be at the high school there. So 16.5 million. If you combine them like that, let's go to the next slide and take a look. I'm sorry, the graph at the bottom of that prior slide kind of shows the combination of your existing debt service, which is shown in gray, and what we would propose in dark blue as new bond debt service. And we'll talk about kind of the limiting factors there on the next slide. So the next slide is a chart that is showing, it's just a spreadsheet that shows kind of how these numbers work together. So what we're looking at there is in under tax rate calculations, the little gray bar, you can see that we're assuming the 15.9 cents. So we're saying, okay, go ahead and add that 4.9 pennies back on your INS side. The first column under tax rate calculation is showing your INS revenue at that 15.9 cents. So that's saying, okay, if we charge that, we're going to collect about 1.542 million under that rate. The next column showing your existing debt service, just over $1 million. And the next column is showing net available revenue, right? So that's the revenue that we have available to work with when it comes to new bond capacity. And you can see that for several years there, while you still have your existing debt service outstanding, that net available revenue is just over about $520,000. That becomes a bit of a limiting factor for us, is that I can only size the bond so big as a $500 payment each year initially, because we have to leave room for your existing debt service, right? So what that means is, although those later payments in that column that says net available revenue are somewhere north of 1.6 million, I cannot assume 1.6 million all the way through without increasing your tax rate to get there, right? So the revenue we have available is about $500,000 a year, and that's kind of how we have to size our bond. The next column is showing the proposed or the prospective savings from doing our funding in 2022. So that would be money that you would gain. And then the 2022 new money is shown in the next column, Series 2022 new money. So that's a bit of what your debt service structure would look like under the 16.5 million. Okay? And you can see over to the right in the tax rate column, each one of those tax rate settings for each of those years is less than 15.9 cents that you would be at on the INS side. So it is possible to do that. And I think what we're saying is, if you look in the column that says Series 2022 new money, you can see all of those first year payments are in the $471,000 range. Those represent interest-only payments. So the major drawback to combining these together, I say major drawback, one of the limiting factors to combining these things together is that with your current debt service included, you would only be able to make an interest-only payment on the 16.5 million. And I guess what we've done is said, okay, if we run the bond amount up high enough, when do our interest-only payments get close to the amount of revenue that we have to work with? I.e., when does the 471 get close to kind of the 500,000 that we have available to work with. And so I think we're right in that ballpark, and I think that brought us to kind of the 16.5 million. Legitimately, it's going to look a lot like a couple of the next two structures we're going to look at, but it's a little bit different, and we'll see what we say. So let's go down to the next scenario, because we'll look at a comparison at the end. All right. So the next scenario says, okay, what if we don't want to make interest-only payments? What if we don't combine them from a debt service standpoint? What if we say, look, we want to have principal and interest in every year? Well, what that does is that brings our bond capacity down. Right? So if we say, okay, if we do some interest-only payments at the front to allow for our current debt service, and we try and maximize our bond amount under that assumption, we got the 16.5. If we go back and say, look, we don't want to do these interest-only payments, we want to make sure that we have principal in every year, what does that do to our 16.5? It brings it down to about the $10 million range. So what you're looking at there is a bond amount of about $10 million. This assumes adding back the same 4.9 pennies, so nothing's changed, about 15.9 cents on the INS side, for a total tax rate of about $1.1250, which is exactly what you were at in 2018. Okay? So what this is saying is, if we want to take a more principal forward approach to our bond debt service, then it is going to decrease our overall bond amount. It doesn't make it any more or less of a viable situation. But when we look at our comparison slide here at the end, I think you'll see, from an interest payback standpoint, kind of where the benefit lies. So if you go down to the next slide that shows the spreadsheet that's similar to what we looked at before, it'll be a little easier to see what we're talking about here. So again, you have your column that's INS revenue at the existing rate, the 1.54 million roughly that we were looking at before. Your existing debt service is shown in that column, nothing's changed there, which leads to the net available revenue column, nothing has changed there. And then you factor in the refunding, which gives us a little more room there. So what we're looking at is in that Series 2022 new money, if you look down that column, you will see that each one of those payments from year to year is roughly the same, meaning that it has principal and interest amortized in each year. So we are including principal in each year in each column going down. And it evens out the payment sum. There's not a point in time where you go from making interest-only payments to making principal and interest payments. It's a more even payment structure. And you can see that it still meshes fairly well with your current debt service. If you look over in the column, this tax rate column, you'll see that each tax rate setting is under the 15.9 cents that you have to work with. And one thing that you could consider is, although the payments in the back end of this bond structure are much less than what we looked at before, you will still be bringing in quite a bit of revenue at that point. So when your old bond pays off in year 2035, 36, you could potentially take that extra revenue and start to make early principal reductions on the bond. So although we don't have a bunch of debt service scheduled in this area right here, that doesn't mean that we can't use our available INS revenue to start paying it off early. But we've taken a lesser bond amount and a more principal forward structure. And again, that's kind of a $10 million amount that considers that we want to have principal and interest in every year. So then conversely, what I was thinking is, okay, if we go back and look at interest on the next slide, if we go and look at interest-only payments, and we do some interest-only payments, and that takes us up to 16.5, well, what would it take to get us back to 16.5 if we wanted to have principal and interest every year? The logical next step is, how do we get back to that 16.5 million but not have a bunch of interest-only payments? What that would take is another 2.5 pennies of tax rate, basically. So instead of just putting the 4.9 pennies back on the books, you would put the 4.9 back on, and then you would increase another 2.45 pennies for a total of 7.35 pennies of increase. And that would bring your total tax rate to about $1.1469 as opposed to $1.1250. So really a fairly nominal increase from a tax rate standpoint. That would equate to about $24 a year for $100,000 of taxable value. So from an annual standpoint, it's not a huge increase on the tax-paying citizens. But what that does is it allows us the room to go from 10 million back up to 16.5 and still have principal and interest being payable every year, not making a bunch of interest-only payments. Okay, so if we go down and look at the spreadsheet, the next slide in the spreadsheet, you can see a little bit about how that works. Again, the INS revenue and existing rate column does not change. Existing debt service is the same. Net available revenue has increased a little bit because we added an extra 2.45 pennies to the mix. Your refunding is shown there. And then obviously in Series 2022 new money, you can see that that we're now at an increased payment amount. Although, so what's happening? Did I lose you?
No, we're here.
We still can hear you, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. That's all you need to be able to do is hear me. So in that column that says Series 2022 new money, you can see that we have nice even payments every year, but those payments are greater than the 490,000 we were looking at before. That allows us the ability to go back up to 16.5 million. If you look over at the tax rate setting column, you will see that each one of those tax rate settings is below the amount prescribed. So what we're looking at in that Series 2022 new money column, those are nice, even principal and interest payments every year that allow us to get back up to 16.5 million. And again, when you get down to that year 2036 roughly, and your old bond pays off, although you don't have a bunch of debt service above and beyond the 794 schedule, you can take all of your excess revenue and put it towards paying the bond off early. Meaning we would start in that 2051 year down at the bottom, 798,250, and we would pay that year off. And then the next year we'd make a collection and we'd pay the next year off, the 2050 year, and the next year 2049. So although we don't currently have it scheduled because it would bust our model, we can use any excess revenue to shorten the term of that bond to pay it back early. Did I lose you?
No, we still hear you.
Okay, gotcha, perfect. Sorry, I'm getting a few error messages here. I just wanted to make sure you can still hear me. Okay, so what we're looking at there is again, a very principal forward structure that gets us back to our 16.5 million that was our original maximum that we were looking at. So I think that's a very plausible option, and I think that does give you plenty of room and ability to go after a decent sized number and also pay it back early and consider paying it back early. So a very viable option there. If you go to the next slide, this is kind of the comparison slide, and this is what I wanted us to see when it comes to when we were talking about interest-only payments and principal and interest payments. The refunding comparison there at the top, refunding scenario comparison, that's plain. That's very easy to see. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You're basically looking at somewhere in the $550,000 worth of saving range versus 200,000 in savings. No, 290,000 versus 550. No questions there what the case is. If you look at the comparison below that, which is the comparison of new money, that's where we really want to kind of pay attention to what we're looking at. So in scenario one, we said, okay, the 16.5 million is still present there. What we see down below is that when it says years of principal deferral, 14 years of principal deferral, meaning you're going to have to defer some principal in order to pay off your current debt. It does have a little bit lower INS rate than our other $16.5 million scenario, but not too much. What we really want to look at is what is our total debt service repayment, right? And that's where we kind of understand that if we defer principal for 14 years, we're going to pay back about $26.7 million. Conversely, if we look over at scenario 3, that has no years of principal deferment, we would pay back about $23.9 million. So what we're saying here is it's going to cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 million in interest to defer that principal for 14 years. And I think in seeing that, that's what kind of led me to say, okay, we need to see what it looks like to defer principal and go after a maximum scenario. We also need to see what it looks like to not defer principal. And I guess in scenario 3, the cost of not deferring principal is down below. You can see 1835 as far as tax rate setting. That's the perceived cost of saying, okay, if we need to have principal in every year, then what do we need to do to achieve that? We need to increase our tax rate slightly. About 2.5 cents is what we talked about, 2.45. So if you were willing to add just a slight amount to your INS tax rate, then I think you could achieve the same $16.5 million bond target, and it would save you roughly $2.5 million in interest by doing that. And I think if I'm a community member and I'm considering, do I want to incur a little bit of tax increase, or do I want to keep my same tax rate and wind up paying another $2.5 million in interest? It's something to consider as a tax-paying citizen too. So I think I wanted to kind of just show you that comparison. All of that to say, I think from a bond standpoint, in just keeping a very normalized tax rate, like very comparable to what you had in 2018, I think the range of what you can accomplish there is somewhere in the $10 to $16.5 million range. I think it's fair to say that you can do somewhere between 10 and 16.5 million, and even if you decide to pursue principal in every year and kind of make it a more straightforward structure, I think you still have plenty of room to look at doing somewhere between 10 to 16.5. You guys may have already had some conversations with Mr. Huseman as far as what projects you might want to accomplish, what that might look like as far as cost. If for some reason there was a need to go over $16.5 million, that's very, very possible too. You guys have a low to overall tax rate setting compared to a lot of districts in the state, so you do have some tax rate room to address things. I would just bear in mind that if we start moving over the $16.5 million mark, that INS tax rate that is shown in the comparison under scenario 3, 18.35, that would start to move up a little bit as well as far as your INS tax rate. And then your overall tax rate setting in turn would move up a little bit too. So it's not the end of the world, but it is something that you guys identified as something that may be unpopular or may not be something that you want to do. So again, that kind of just gives you an idea of where you fall on the spectrum. But I think even with the 18.35 cents in place, you get $1.14.7 roughly overall. $1.14 of overall tax rate is very reasonable compared to other districts in the state. And then obviously we can look at some comparisons for districts in your region next time I come up and kind of see where your tax rate falls. But I think you're looking at a very prevalent range, bond range between 10 and 16.5. And then if you need to go over 16.5 million to accomplish your project scope, you definitely can do that. It would just take a few more tax pennies. I think if we consider the fact that we only added a couple of pennies to your rate to go from 10 to 16.5, if we added a couple of more pennies, I think it would easily take us up in the $20 million range, somewhere in that scope, and you still would probably be under $1.20 of overall tax rate, and would probably be somewhere in the 20-cent range as far as the INS rate. So again, very, very manageable increases if you wanted to consider. So anyways, I think that presents a fairly clear range of where your bond capacity might lie between 10 and 16.5. And then obviously by your choice and what you want to see happen in a very nominal tax increase, you can go over that $16.5 million amount fairly easily. So Guys, from a timing standpoint, if you do want to shoot for May, we're looking at a calling deadline of February, mid-February. I believe it's the 14th or 16th. It's the calling deadline for May bonds and bond elections. I think that kind of inspired the conversation in the boardroom tonight of kind of me bringing this to you and kind of showing where your capacity lies, and that if you do want to consider May, which I think is very, very plausible and would be wise to do, you probably are going to need to start having some conversations about what your project scope looks like. You're probably going to need to enlist some assistance from Mr. Huseman as far as determining what that might cost and what you're looking at from a total bond amount and bond scope. And I think, kind of by January or the end of January, we would need to have a pretty good idea of what your project scope looks like, what that might equate to in dollars, and we would need to be getting ready to call a bond in February. On the other side of that coin, you could look at next November as well. It is midterm elections next November, so that could present some issues. But, it's definitely a consideration of waiting. I know that, just kind of off the cuff, the longer you wait, the more the price of your project is going to go up and the more chance you get for increasing interest rates. So I'm not trying to scare you or do anything like that, but just a little bit of food for thought there as far as should we look at May or should we wait? But anyway, I wanted to throw a little bit of timing out there as far as needing to kind of get on the ball with creating a project scope and determining some pricing, and then getting ready for our January and February board meetings if that's something that we want to call. And we would also be kind of having the refunding discussion about that time too. Somewhere in February or March, we would start on documentation to get that thing going and get it out the door. So pretty good timing between the refunding and the new money portion if we were to consider that. Just a couple of timing thoughts. Guys, the next slide has just a couple of assumptions that we used in our rates. But that does kind of complete the discussion I wanted to have this evening. I think I can hear pretty well now. Are there anything that I might be able to address or any questions that you might have?
No, John, I don't see any hands going up, but you gave us a lot of food for thought, a lot of information, so I think what we need to do is digest this and then I'll get a hold of you.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. That would be wonderful. And hang on to the presentation, take a look at it. If you have any questions, please feel free to, James, you can holler at me anyone if you can. Just get in touch by phone or email. We'll address any questions and then kind of maybe determine some next steps as to what you think you might want to do moving forward. So, guys, I appreciate your time very much tonight. I'm sorry for, again, any background noise or other conversations going on. I've been in this airport for most of the day and I'm ready to be out of it myself. So thank you for bearing with me. And again, if there's any questions, just send them my way. We'll get them addressed.
All right, we appreciate you, John. Thank you.
Guys, thank you all very much. I look forward to seeing y'all soon.
Be careful.
Okay. Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
Okay, we'll move on. Superintendent's report, Mr. Morales.
The first thing I'm talking about is employee dress code. We talked a little bit about that. It's something I'm going to put into the employee handbook. It's just a standard address of what the teachers and employees should dress and how they should look professional at all times. And like I say, it's not for a vote. It's just a heads up for you all that we can put it in there since our employee handbook is a living document. So once we have it in there, then we can go with it. The next one is what we were just talking about here, creating a long-range planning committee. I've showed you a list of names, possibilities of people that we would put on it. Before we even do anything, we need to know what our needs are. So that's what that committee would do, is just looking at the needs of the district and kind of prioritizing what those needs are.
What's your time frame on that?
Well, I really didn't have a time frame until I started hearing some of his stuff, but I'm going to try and do it as quickly as I can. I'm trying to get 12 people. As soon as I get 12 people to agree to be on that committee, then we'll start looking at the buildings. and seeing what it is. I mean, for a long time, we probably needed to have a long-range planning committee. We just really have never had one. And unless y'all have any other questions.
Anything else? Any questions for Mr. Morales? Now, we'll move to campus reports. The first one up is Mr. Felix. Anything to add to your report, or anything you want to emphasize?
One thing to change on there, I can't remember the certain number that I put for the amount of credits. I want to say it was about 50 that we had finished so far.
Okay.
As of earlier this afternoon, we were pushing 58. So
Great.
it's even bumped since
That's great.
last week. So
All right.
students are working hard and it's working.
All right, thank you. All right, anything to add to the Perryton High School report? Here?
He's sick. He's got a fever.
No,
Maybe,
we don't need.
Straight one for the band, marching contest?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's-
yeah,
yeah,
good deal.
that's- Band is moving on to area contest, first time that's happened. Wow. It's
Proud of
great.
them.
They go to Abilene here in a couple of weeks.
Couple weeks, I believe, yes. It's fantastic. Radar report,
Also, junior high.
okay. All right. Williams.
He said to tell you that everything is great at Williams.
That's what- Sorry. Okay,
Bad enough when he was saying it for himself.
okay. All right. Right.
Everything's great at Wright.
Kinder.
Same thing.
Same thing? Okay. All right. We'll move on to our director's reports, maintenance.
I don't have anything there.
Okay. Ranger Roundup Learning Center.
Clark, do you have anything on
Nothing to add.
Okay. Food service.
Good.
Technology.
Nothing to add.
Okay. Bilingual ESL annual program report.
Do you have any questions on that? I don't have anything to add.
Okay. All right. That concludes the report section of our board meeting. Doug? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll let you out. I'm sorry. Technology, or not technology, but
it? Communications.
communications and safety.
Yes, and I do have something to add. Some positive news on the COVID counts. We've taken a dramatic drop. We have 4 students and 1 staff member out with COVID at the present time. Things have improved dramatically, or hope they stay that way.
And it's good. Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
I didn't know if you would say athletic director, who's not here, but it's sort of technology related and him. He got a new toy today that will, he just tells his phone to start filming the games or the practices. He didn't have to have somebody stand there and film. He's going to tomorrow, just in case it doesn't work the first time, but we got that all set up today.
That's cool.
Be a handy thing.
Is it up on the press box? Is that what's at?
It's on the visitors press box. I think that has a better view of the scoreboard and stuff. But it tracked, we have the same thing in the gym, and somehow it knows where the ball is and tracks it, and then there's a separate camera that just constantly shoots at the scoreboard. Oh, it's a really neat thing. They sure love it. Basketball.
And by the way, we won our first district ball game.
Yes,
Friday
we
night,
did.
So that was a good thing.
We thumped Levelland pretty good. Now, if we can take that one Friday night,
There we go.
or we will take that one
There
Friday
you
night,
go.
let's put it that way. They will have a long bus ride back to Levelland.
Yeah.
Okay? Anything else? If not, next up's our CFO's report.
First is the disbursements report. We sort of got, you need a little guide for these. We got different ones because we're working with 2 fiscal years here. The first section is starting on page 24 is our checks paid for September of 2021 for the new fiscal year starting in September. So there's looks like about 13 pages of those. And then checks paid for in October today, date of the report, which is ran in the new year. There's, let's see, 6 pages of those. And on page 47, 48 is pending disbursements for October. And page 50, 51 is the prior checks paid in September for the prior fiscal year, which you can see at the top. You can see at the very top right, you can see the file ID. File ID 1 is the prior year, which the 1 stands for the year ending in 21. It's a fiscal year. We have completely different file sets for each fiscal year. And our current year is always file ID C, so you'll see that consistently on these and on our financial reports also. And so September for the prior year, there looks like 6 pages of those. And then paid in October, paid on page 57, 58 is prior year expenses paid in October. See those. And then pending checks in October for the prior year on page 61, 62. Looks like there's 3 of those there. Next is our financial report.
Doug, before you start, I just had one question.
Sure.
I see we made our annual payment on the frontline technology for the absence, and
Yes.
is that working as well as we thought it would?
I think it is. I think it's working really well.
People are liking it, utilizing
Uh-huh.
it. I know we had a pretty big discussion in December 19 when we bought the thing.
Yeah, Diane Goldsberry's sort of overview of it. Some of these principals might comment on it. Harry, y'all using it, and like, is it working good for
Is it
you?
beneficial?
It's very beneficial at the elementary school. It's easy to use and it's going good.
Cool. It manages the substitutes.
Yes,
for-
it's working well at the junior high, and we've been using it very successfully. Sometimes the subs, it's not perfect,
Right.
getting the subs assigned, but yeah, but we.
But a good
all of our
good
teachers
tool
are-
and worth the money.
Yes, sir, all of our teachers are using it.
Moving on page 63 starts our financial report, cash position and book balance. And this year, you see, even our cash position, you can see we've got 2 different reports. You can see our file ID 1 at the top there. These are the balance that we ended September for. We have not moved our ending balances. We've got those pretty well adjusted for our audit. Our audit's going to start on November 8th, a couple weeks away. So there could be, we're still cleaning up. I think we're 99% finished with all the year-end adjustments, unless something pops up. There could be a few accounts payable straggle in, but I think we're pretty well close to everything. But you got to add these 2 schedules on 64 and 65 to get the current cash position, which, like the general fund, 260 was at the end of the year, and then there's a net decrease for September at -13. That results in the cash position there on the next page there, so you can see that. Our general funds on page 66 are ending balance of 233,502.29. Broker accounts is 253,922. We had a CD that matured right at the end of September, has since been reinvested. And then our CDs, 7565, the schedule of those is attached there on the next page, on page 67. Interest and sinking funds, 252,032 cents in the cash account of CDs at 252,201. That's scheduled on page 69. Cafeteria funds of 51,284.99. Special education funds of 490523 plus the CD of 200,000 on there on page 71. The CD schedule at 72. Activity funds of 380, 880, 466, and the CDs of 335, 992, 60 on page 74. Ranger roundup of 45,210, 99. Capital project funds of 121, 482, 14. No change there. Okay, we get into our financials. On page 78, we've got a projection. It's pretty close to what we projected in September meeting. On the accompanying financial statements, our revenue realized in our general fund, $20,849,460. Projecting possibly additional $3,000 of expenses. Going to be pretty close to that, maybe a little less than that, really. Pension benefit transfers in a different fund, which will be merged at the audit, 5,092, and expenditures of 21,260, which gives a net decrease in our fund balance of about a little over $400,000, which is pretty much what we've been sort of projecting for last month. That will leave us a projected fund balance of about $6.5 million, $6,531,000. And the financial statements here on the next page are reflecting the prior fiscal year. There you can see the numbers there that reflect those numbers. Our revenues of $20,848,460 and expenditures of $21,260,049. And out of the column there at the bottom, going across, you can see our capital outlay items, 496, 199. We've spent almost $500,000 on capital projects last year, and you can see that on page 80, which is the schedule of those. And we bought a van, we bought that bus, we converted that special ed bus, bought some equipment, bought a maintenance pickup. Of course, we spent softball field improvements. We had spent $100,000 last year, and then of course we're spending more, so that will be sort of bridge both years. And then we remodeled the pre-K building, which was a huge number, $146,000, and the nurse shower project at Williams, and then the admin remodeled, so you can see how those total up there. And on our financial statement format there on page 81, there's our revenues and our expenditures. We're under expended in all our budgets. We didn't exceed any appropriation amount. You see our budgeted was $22,547,000, and our expenditures ended up $21,260,000. So the expenditures were, of course, obviously less than our budget there, which ended up great. Sort of balanced out the decline in revenues, so I think we ended up pretty good. Food service, you can see, let's go back to that page, again on page 78. The food service revenues of $1,231,000 and expenditures of $1,231,000, which includes the transfer from the general fund into the food service fund to cover their loss, basically. And that amount, you can see on the financial statements there. The other is shown in that on page 85, other resources, $157,737 is the transfer in to sort of make them whole, so to speak. And then the same numbers on the financial statements here on page 86 and 87. Debt service fund, no change since on those. Just pretty much right in line with what we've been projecting. Capital projects fund, no change there. Ranger roundup, the expenditures of $518,237 there on page 93, and the revenues, and you can see in the other resources column is $133,157, and that is made up of two components. One of them was from the hospital district of about, I believe, about 78,000 or so, and the balance is what we transferred, about 50-some thousand, to sort of zero out their fund balance. So, those expenditures, those transfers are shown as a other use on the general fund financial statements there. And then you can see the detail of the revenues realized in the range around up 518,000 for the year, including those transfers, and the detail of those revenues there, and the expenditures of course, there's two different sections. You can see those transfers on page 96. The 55,000 is from our general fund, and the 78,000, see, is from the hospital district. Expenditures, a total of 518,236, and I've always been giving you the detail of those expenditures there, page 98 and 99. Okay, now we'll switch gears and we'll start looking at the month of September in the new fiscal year. And that starts on page 100. Revenues realized of $1,818,000 and expenditures of $2,031,000. And then the detail reflecting those on the financial statement format there on page 101, 102, 103. Remember, we had a balance, the board adopted a balanced budget of $21,141,887 of expenditures and revenues. The 105 is we appropriated $250,000 for capital projects, and out of that I've moved about $85,000 to wind up the softball project. I think that includes a contingency though, and we spent some of it, but I don't think we'll end up spending the whole contingency on that project. That still will leave about $165,000 left to be designated or allocated during the year. Food service revenues of $18,000 and expenditures of $39,000. Those numbers again on page 107, 108. Debt service, not any activity really there yet. We received a small amount of taxes in October for the month of September, probably around $2,000 or $3,000, but no activity yet on debt service. But capital projects, no change there. Ranger Roundup revenues of $24,960, expenditures of $21,594 for the month. And you can see those financials statement numbers there. And then last but not least is our enrollment report. That will be on page 120. Our enrollment for the month of October there, it looks like 2,047 compared to the prior year of October was 2,130, and then compared to opening day 2,105.
Where did we base the budget? Remind me that. The 88 number, did we base the budget?
1925. It's on this financial right here. Let's look here. Yeah, I'll look on page 100. The tax rate was 29,634 and the budgeted ADA was 1929.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, like we've talked in the past, enrollment doesn't equate to ADA, but I think our percentages are looking good so far. Any questions on anything? This will be the last look we do on the prior fiscal year. Obviously, we'll have an audit, but if there's anything material, something we'll include that in the November deal, but that's sort of, I don't expect it to be much different, pretty much right in line with that projection.
We're not gonna have anything material right when you're leaving, right?
We're gonna quit, yeah, we will. There you go. There you go.
Thank you.
And I think that next month, I'm gonna let Brittany will give you the report. She's gonna work it up, and then I'm gonna be here to answer questions for her, but she'll be taking over, I think, next month. But I will be here. My plan is to retire the end of January of this year, so I will give y'all a resignation letter. I'll give it to you probably for next month. So, looking forward to it.
Okay. Any other questions for Doug?
Thank y'all, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work. And Brittany? Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. Consent agenda items. Okay, the only thing there is the minutes.
Move to approve.
You approve the ones in the book or the new one?
Now, let's approve the new ones that have the votes on it.
Yeah, one line on the table.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Passes 7-0. Before we leave, we need to set a meeting time for November. As I stated earlier, week of the 22nd, we're out of school all week for Thanksgiving and holidays. Mr. Morales and I discussed, we're running the basketball season on Tuesdays and Fridays and soccer. So our recommendation is Thursday, November the 18th.
Week before Thanksgiving.
Yes, sir.
Doug, is that gonna give you enough time?
Yes.
18th would?
Should ask Brittany that.
No, Brittany, yeah.
Yes, I'll be ready.
We'll be
Okay.
ready.
All right, everybody okay with November the 18th at 6 o'clock?
Probably, well, not.
Okay. All right. That's all right. We'll set November the 18th. Anything else? All right. Meeting adjourned at 8:04.